You with the Passion narrative in Luke chapter 22. The first thing pointed out here is that the Passover was drawing near. So the occurrence of the Passover is very important in this gospel. You'll see this is laid out in the whole theological explanation and understanding of what's going on in the crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus, as well as the establishment of the new Israel, the church. Okay, so we're set up here, and the Passover is coming soon, and the chief priests and the scribes, the Jewish religious authorities, were trying to kill Jesus, right? And then we're shown here, that this really is a battle of good versus evil. Good will win. But for now, Satan entered into Judas, right? So this is he's acting as the agent of evil here. He was one of the 12 apostles, but he goes to the priests and the temple guards, and he hands Jesus over to them. They set up a plan where he can turn Jesus in. Now look, they want to do this in the absence of a crowd. So what we have here in Jerusalem, we have a lot of people accepting and recognizing Jesus, even as the chief priests and the scribes, the religious leaders and political leaders of the Jews, they're not on the same page as the people in general. I'll say the people in general, the crowd, they're for the most part, for most of this gospel, and we see instances throughout the Passion narrative where there is reception of Jesus, where we do see the people of Jerusalem sharing in the hospitality of God. So in Luke, in keeping with the hospitality theme, Jesus is the host of this Passover meal. Now, Passover meal is a celebration that the Jews have every year when they remember the way that God freed them from slavery in Egypt. It would have been way back around 1250 BC. So Luke stresses Jesus' role as the host, the generous host of the Passover meal. And as Byrne puts it, the hospitality of God is there when Jesus hosts the Passover meal in a climactic way. And he institutes something else, the Eucharist, that will sacramentally continue that hospitality in the life of the church. So Byrne is explaining here the way that the Gospel according to Luke sets up the Eucharistic ritual that we do in the church, in the Christian churches today. So Jesus goes on to talk about the eschatological, the end fulfillment of the kingdom of heaven, right? Again, we said, remember in Luke, that salvation is present in the here and now. The kingdom of heaven is present among us in Jesus and anyone else who does the will of God, who shares in the hospitality of God, who loves with this ridiculous generosity. But he also is talking here about the not yet aspect of the kingdom, that there will be the fulfillment of the kingdom of God. So he says, I'm going to eat. And this is kind of going to be the last time I eat the Passover meal, right? The Passover meal, we'll see, will be transformed. Now, this is the important theological phrasing too here. When Jesus says, this is my body, which will be given for you. Do this in memory of me. Now, this word memory is not is translated from the Greek word anamnesis, which really means more of a living remembrance, or it's like you do something now that helps you remember what God did in the past, and in a certain sense, what God is always doing. Right? So there's going to be a living remembrance in the eating of Christ's body and the drinking of his blood. We're going to remember that God is always saving us. God is always helping us. God is always reuniting us with himself. And again, this point here, we'll go into this in a second, which will be shed for you. So here we're going to see the idea that Jesus is making a parallel. He's saying, this bread is my body, which will be shed for you. He's saying that his sacrifice of his body and his blood, when he allows himself to be tortured to death, this is going to be something that's going to benefit us. We'll get into this later. This has to do with the idea of atonement, that what he does is making up for or making a difference for us. It's changing things for us. So Burns sets out here in this explanation of the Eucharist as the time between, right? The Last Supper, I mean, Jesus is there. The kingdom of heaven is present. He's loving unconditionally. He's living God's will on earth. And it's true today when we love and help each other, when we share in the ridiculous generosity of God, right? The kingdom of heaven is here present with us on earth, if and when we love like God loves. And you've probably seen examples of it in your own life, when people put love first, when people put aside their self-centered desires and awaken to their divine desire to love others as much as they love themselves. So we do have the kingdom of heaven here present partially now. But we also have the hope and expectation that this will come to fullness. In other words, that our world will change, that we'll have a world in which we don't have war, because no one will be saying, that's my oil. We have a world in which we believe that we will have no class distinctions and oppression, because people won't say, oh, well, I want more money, so I'm going to try to take advantage of you, right? We'll have a world in which people voluntarily help their neighbor, where they want to share with everyone as much as they want to share with their own family, right? No, we're not there yet. We might see individuals, saints, I'd call them, who do live this way, and they seem to be pretty happy people. But the Eucharist is time of the church. This is the interim. So we're reminded, hey, we are here to make Christ present to the world today in a way that is going to make it universal, right? In a way that is going to bring about the day when we all live a life of unconditional love for everyone. So here I'm focusing on the given up for you. Right? And Byrne talks about how this explains the meaning of Christ, of the death that Jesus is about to undergo. Right? Again, it's seen as his death, the death of an innocent person, is seen as something that's going to free humanity from guilt. I'm sorry, that's probably not the best word for Luke. It's going to free humanity from slavery to sin. Right? Now, slavery was understood in terms of debt in the Jewish world, because you could, if you had fell into debt, you couldn't pay back your debt, you would become someone's slave. Now, someone else could come and pay off your debt. That person would be called your redeemer. They would free you. Now, in Luke, again, sin isn't really looked on as a personal debt or a personal guilt, but is an affliction that one must be free from, right? So that's what this act does. It frees us from affliction. It frees us from slavery to sin. It frees us from the source of suffering in our lives. So as Byrne puts it, believers of subsequent generations, right, which could include us, will experience the hospitality of God in full knowledge of its cost, right? I mean, that's a true hospitality, right? To give everything. Be like if you went to your friend's house and he said, "Oh yeah, you like this house? It's yours." Or if you said, "Oh, nice car," and someone said, "Oh, you like it? Here, take my car." Right? Cost not only to Jesus who gave himself up for them, but also cost to the Father who sent the beloved Son in visitation of Israel in the world. So either way you talk about it, it is God giving himself, his very self to us. That's the ultimate hospitality. Now, of course, this is not because they deserve it, right? As we continue in chapter 22, they're having that same stupid argument they were having before about who is the greatest, right? And like I said, it's trying to figure out who is the best is the opposite of the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says, wait a minute, again, he just brings them back and says, well, if you guys think I'm the greatest, you think I'm the Messiah, look what I've done. I serve the others. So it's that same message, right? The idea is to be like God, not to be better than the other people. That's not the idea. Relatively better than the other people around you. No, the idea is to be like God. That's what's going to bring you true happiness, which means that you love everybody no matter what. And this ranking, this pecking order means nothing. You don't care if you're the best or worst. You don't care if they're the best or worst. You're going to love them no matter what. But after that, even right after you reprimand them, you see the positive response, right? And this is again where we get kind of into this contrast in the Passion narrative. The Jewish religious and political authorities just rejecting Jesus, but you have emphasized that the other people in Jerusalem, including the apostles, despite their continued ignorance about what Jesus is talking about, they are responding to the hospitality of God with hospitality, right? It is you who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer a kingdom upon you, just as my Father has conferred one on me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you'll sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And by the end of the story, they'll be judging like God, not to say, oh, you did this wrong, you don't deserve my blessings. But they'll be judging and saying, look at every one of these people needs our help, right? From the ones who get it the most to the ones who don't get it at all. Let's help them, especially the ones who need it the most, not the ones who deserve it the most, right? Sick people don't need a doctor. Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. And so they are part of the kingdom here. Again, the kingdom's being conferred on them, not because they earned it. You can see here in just a few verses, they haven't earned it. They still don't understand. They're still doing the same dumb things they were doing before. But because they are open to God's transforming generosity, right? They're willing to accept God's love and willing to let it change them to be generous themselves. And we see this, this acceptance of the Messiah, this desire to to be with God and to be open to God in Peter. And he says, I won't. He says, I will die with you, Jesus. Jesus says, no, you won't. You will actually deny that you know me. When put to the test, you'll flake out. We'll look at how that unfolds soon. Okay, now Luke does emphasize